Hey everyone, how's everyone doing today? And we're back once again with our Monday D&D stream. And on today's DM inspiration, we will be talking a little bit about aberrations, oozes, and other such creatures. And one of the things that we'll definitely be discussing as well is eldritch horror, as well as cosmic horror. And these are the genres where you'll commonly see aberrations and oozes appearing. And we'll also be trying our hand at writing an adventure later on as well. Our ads are not so good. So let's see what happens. Yeah, yeah, ads go away. Streaming with beanies? I don't know. And as for today, I'm wearing a Dendro slime hat, and you can see that this is obviously as much of an aberration as any. And of course, this hat, just like all the other slime hats that we have, is available from Angela's Italian, and we will also be listing them as and when she creates more hats, and that's going to be available on our end as well. Looking preemptively Christmassy, I guess. Oh, and hey, good to have you with us. Is that who I think it is? So yeah, totally. Today we're going to be definitely talking a lot about aberrations, oozes, and other such creatures. And I'm glad that you've had the chance to come join us live today because hopefully we're going to be sharing some tips here that might be inspiring for you as a DM as well as for when you're writing your own stories or just running encounters that feature oozes and aberrations. So yeah. One of the things that I really love about oozes and aberrations is simply just how alien they are and how they're so different from the typical monsters that you might face in D&D. Like if you've played some of the adventures I've written, like the Ooze series or Ooze Dare, Ooze Next, and Fenari's Gambit, you'll know that I really enjoy, using different creatures that are not so common, and they tend to be typically creatures like slimes or oozes or tentacly creatures from the depths, or creatures with some more unusual anatomy, because these are fun. These are entertaining. Um, yeah, I mean definitely the way I use them is probably not so common. Like, have you ever encountered mimics done quite the same way that I do? Um, well, Uzdare was, I guess, one of my earlier works a couple years ago, and it's also one of the works that, well, we were very fortunate to be nominated for with the Annies. And just as the name implies, yeah, definitely spoilers. There are lots of oozes in there, and that's part of the fun of it. It's what it says on the cover. But that aside, I have to say that part of the fun of being a D&D creator is that there are so many things in the bestiary that you can explore, and I think that oozes and aberrations are really quite underrated. Most of the time, you'll see goblins, you'll see ogres, you'll see orcs and trolls. You see trolls everywhere, I swear. Lots of demons, lots of spellcasters, but not so much those things, that are super unusual and out of this world. Yeah, like imagine an adventure that forces you to face star spawn creatures from beyond the crystal sphere, or even creatures that are hydrophobic spray. I don't know. I suppose you could. I suppose you could use a spell to simulate that. But there are definitely lots and lots of fun creatures that are very, very uncommon, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about them today. Starspawn are great. Um, oh, just so you know, there is a creature that's coated in oil, and that creature is called a Boggle. Creature spawns oil as well. And if I recall correctly, you can find that creature's stat block in follows, but that's a fey creature, and we're not going to talk about that today. Yeah, but they're pretty fun. And if you're playing well beyond the Witchlight, I wouldn't be surprised if you see some dungeon craft adventures that might feature boggles, because they're pretty interesting additions, and they make for really cool encounter design as well. I would say that for DMs, using them creatively would be really, really fun. You get to do a lot of them because of all their abilities. And that's what DM inspiration is about, right? We're here to chat about how you can, level up your games, how you're able to perhaps, draw some inspiration and ideas from what we talk about here, and bounce ideas off each other so that we can build better encounters, build better stories for our players. Yeah, Magic the Gathering boggles. I remember those. They were totally not fun to play against. Fortunately, I was a black player, so uh, lots of forced sacrifice effects to get rid of those boggles. Thank goodness. But yeah, so today is going to be all about those aberrations, oozes, and eldritch creatures. And we're going to start perhaps by chatting a little bit about what makes, an aberration. So aberrations, for want of a better word, are creatures with really weird anatomy. They're creatures that have a rather unusual origin, that perhaps have come from beyond the stars or beyond this crystal sphere, or they're alien creatures. They're creatures that are not typically common to the world of D&D, or perhaps more commonly in Adventures League, that's Faerun, Forgotten Realms. And often these creatures have really unusual anatomy. So they may not be quite as similar as typical humans or typical humanoids with like two arms and two legs and a head. They might have amorphous bodies, all sorts of tentacles and appendages, lots and lots of eyes, lots and lots of mouths. They might be able to create strange and unusual effects in their surroundings, like perhaps turning the air around them into an area of silence, or turning the ground into this sticky morass that sucks your legs and pulls you down and stops you from moving around. Yeah, and for some of them, they might have abilities to allow them to blend in, or some magical powers. And one of the most common plays, I guess, one of the most iconic aberrations in D&D would probably be the Beholder, right? So the Beholder is a very iconic D&D creature. It's this massive eyeball with a mouth and more eye stalks. They can fire beams of magic from their eyes, and their central eye has the ability to shut down magic for players, or from their magical effects that are created by their spells or their items. So that's a Beholder, and a Beholder is a classic example of an aberration. It looks strange, it looks alien, it looks kind of grotesque, and there are other creatures as well. So like I was talking about creatures with like lots of mouths and lots of eyes, that's typically how they look, right? And one of the most commonplace, most iconic aberrations that you see at lower levels that fit that description is the Gibbering Mouther. So the Gibbering Mouther is a really scary creature for newer adventurers, newly minted adventurers who are fresh out of adventuring school or who have just left their hometown and have come out, hoping to find their fortune. If they encounter a Gibbering Mounter, it's gonna be not so cool for them. Hey Alex, good to have you with us. Welcome. And so yeah, so if you think about it, some of these creatures are really quite scary. And that's part of the fun of using them in your stories because they're so alien, they're so different from what a typical adventurer might be used to. Like a typical farm boy who's grown up in the outskirts of say Waterdeep may have come across goblins, may have seen orcs in the distance. They may have had to chase away a few wolves with their pitchforks, if the wolves were attacking their livestock, or they might encounter some more common dangers in the wilderness. But for them to encounter an aberration, for them to encounter a creature from the great beyond, a creature that's so infinitely alien, that's so strange to them, that's going to be very unsettling. And that's part of the fun of telling such stories, especially at lower levels. And of course, at higher levels, you might encounter world-spanning, stories, world-spanning plots that involve creatures with supernatural awareness, creatures that dwarf your characters in their significance, creatures from beyond the stars with long-spanning plans that have decided one day to invade your world, to consume all life on your planet. And in the face of such insignificance, in the face of such alien, overpowering entities, what do the characters do? So that's also another way that you can tell a story involving aberrations and other such, cosmic creatures, cosmic horrors. So if you want to talk about such creatures as well, you can think about the Warlock's Patron, the Great Old Ones. The Great Old One Patron is a typical example of the ability to entreat to such aberrations granted to your players, right, to your characters. And as a DM, sometimes you may want to work with the characters to create more content for their patron, tell a better story, to work it into the backgrounds as well, because with such players, typically you're gonna want them to pick a specific concept for the Great Old One that they're worshiping, or the Great Old One that lends them power, right? And as a good example, let's take a look at a Great Old One patron and what kind of abilities they might grant to a warlock. So typically a warlock who masters the magic of the Great Old Ones, they gain some mental powers. They gain the ability to telepathically communicate. They gain the ability to cast spells that influence the mind, that use psychic effects and attacks. At higher levels, they are capable of wielding magic that dominates other creatures and turning them into their servants. And some of these powers, these mental powers, these abilities to influence the minds and thinking of other creatures, they're fairly commonplace in the mythology and the lore of inscrutable alien beings from beyond the stars. Especially if you're a warlock and you're selling your you're selling your soul, or your I guess not so much your soul, but you're pledging yourselves to these patrons, and you're drawing upon a portion of their powers, right? So you probably want to work with them. Yeah, basically like the Fool is an eldritch horror. Yeah, that's not too far from that. Yeah, definitely. So that's from the Lord of the Mysteries, and Lord of the Mysteries is very much a story that connects with cosmic horror. It's got very Lovecraftian vibes. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, what defines an adventure that has some cosmic horror elements later on as well. Yeah, Lord of the Mysteries is a is a web novel. It's available on webnovel.com, by the way, and a lot of the characters draw some inspiration from the tarot. There's a whole world building element to it. Their whole magic system is influenced by that as well. So it's a great story. It's probably one of my favorite web novels, and it's definitely worth looking at, especially if you want to draw some inspiration for cosmic horror, eldritch horror stories, or simply if you're looking at some great old one patrons, then that comes into play as well. But yeah, looking at that, if you want to work with so one of the things that we're going to do today as part of this creative exercise is that we're going to think about some potential ways that we could create a great old one patron, because that's a little bit about aberrations and eldritch horrors and stuff like that as well. So we can do a bit of brainstorming later. I'm gonna pull up Jamboard later on, and we can just do a quick creative jam for DMs here on the stream. So we can build a great old one patron. We can build some a few encounters involving some of my favorite low-level aberrations as well, and we can develop that, and we can see how far we can go today. So today is going to be a very much creative exercise as well. So on the topic of cosmic horror, so the whole theme behind cosmic horror is that humans are insignificant. There are powerful creatures out there from beyond the stars, from out of out of your knowledge, out of your realm of experience, and these creatures are inscrutable beings that have a subtle control over your reality. And if you touch on these creatures, if you suddenly gain a knowledge and realization of these creatures, bad stuff happens. These beings are inscrutable, they are alien. They often think of you as nothing significant whatsoever, a net to be squished. And sometimes adventurers, investigators, people who are curious about such things tap on this knowledge, and while they gain great enlightenment and realization about things that are beyond their scope of knowledge, beyond the world that they know it, when they step into this fantastical world dominated by the knowledge of these eldritch horrors, their worldview changes. And there may also be some perceptible physical and mental changes as well. And that is part of the cosmic horror. The fact that you know that you are insignificant in the face of these great and powerful beings. And at the same time, how effective their influence can be. How they can tug, world events in a certain direction. How they can influence you in a certain direction. And perhaps, they can even kind of mutate your body or affect your mind. Or you suddenly realize that, hey, these creatures are all about you in this world. And then you discover that life is not quite as simple as you know it. And for adventurers, this could be the premise of a great story. What if your players awaken to realize that there are aberrations walking among you? That'll be a great start to an adventure, to a campaign. And if you have your hands on Veneration's Guide to Ravenloft, which I already show here, this is Veneration's Guide. This is the special art cover, the alternate cover. There's actually a fair bit on cosmic horror in there. So there are a couple of pages in there. Yes, and thus Aberrant Warlock was born. Yeah. So lots of interesting ways you could talk about, how these powers made their way into mortal hands, and how these supernatural creatures that dwell in society might be lurking around. if you look at the cosmic horror section in Variations Guide to Ravenloft, which is obviously one of the more recent books. It does give a good indication as well about the cosmic horror genre, and it also gives some helpful advice and tips to players who might want to create cosmic horror dreadlords. But of course, some of the information here you can definitely bring up. You can take it out of Ravenloft. You can apply it to your own home games. You can apply it to any other settings that you want to create, and it kind of matters. It's kind of useful. So give it a look if you have your hands on Variations Guide. It's on, I think, page 49, and it's a generally helpful few pages that sums up what I've talked about a little bit as well. Yeah, Lord of the Mysteries is coming out next year as an animation. It's going to be done by BC May, and that's one of the best animation studios in China. They did 魔道祖师, which is Grandmaster of Demonic Cultivation. They did Heaven's Official Blessing as well, and also they did quite a few other animations. So that's great. So definitely go take a look at that. It's good stuff. So talking about animation, while we're at it, King's Avatar, yeah, King's Avatar is brilliant. Also done by them. Talking about animation, there are quite a few animation that feature cosmic horror as well. So if you're a fan of Japanese anime, there was a pretty decent adaptation of cosmic horror genre turned into a mecha story, turned into a mecha genre, and that was Demon Bane by Nitro Plus. So that was pretty cool. And more recently, just this year, I think early this year, there was a kind of cosmic horror, Cthulhu, ancient great old ones, supernatural entities kind of story called Decide Tromare. I think that was released sometime in March, and that's a more recent anime. So there's some good opportunity there to pick out some inspiration if you like anime and you want to watch some anime that could give you some ideas of how to portray these creatures, the supernatural entities, these that are from beyond the stars, that are alien, that are beyond normal human understanding. All right, so yeah, how would you create a great old one patron? For me, I would definitely say I would probably start by sitting down with the player and discussing how they envision this great old one patron to be. Right. So maybe the player would say that they want to draw their inspiration from a more conventional source, kind of like H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu and Friends. So H.P. Lovecraft is was an American writer, and H.P. Lovecraft created several stories that are cosmic horror in theme and nature, and together with some of his contemporaries and some of his friends, H.P. Lovecraft pretty much formed this doujin circle, I would say, this group of writers, this group of collaborative writers who created a I guess a kind of a setting and kind of a storytelling medium and this world building exercise where they populated it with creatures that are from beyond the stars, supernatural entities. And many of these entities were either inscrutable alien beings that had no discernible anatomy. There could be entire planets that were living and hovering in space that were like, maybe they were like this giant alien eyeball that was floating in the air like a moon. Or they could be creatures with tentacles and all sorts of appendages. like Cthulhu. And if one of your players is perhaps more familiar with these creatures, then they might come up with some. They might want to draw some relation to that. And among the patrons of the warlocks that were featured in previous editions of D&D as well, many of them referenced such supernatural creatures that were maybe inspired by H.P. Lovecraft and friends as great old ones. And that was, in fact, one of the phrases coined by H.P. Lovecraft. All his supernatural beings, all the supernatural entities, the greatest ones of all, the ones who held the most power, they were called the great old ones. Right? But for your players, if they want to be a bit more creative, one of the things you can do with them is to tell them to create, together with you, the patron, using certain themes and ideas. So you may want to create a naming convention for them. Like, start with a title. What would you describe this entity, this being, as you see them? Not their real name, because for many of these creatures, it might be impossible, improbable to describe their names. And in fact, that is absolutely correct. In cosmic horror, it's about studying these alien entities. And in some cases, it may not be the greatest, because there might be some very, very negative connotations to that. So if you were in fact creating a supernatural patron, that was a great old one for a warlock, perhaps you could start with describing the kind of attire they wear, or the kind of ornaments that they have on their clothes, or the kind of items that they carry. And you could describe the qualities of it, because staring or looking into the face of this entity to try to understand and try to comprehend what they look like is something that would probably cause great damage to your character. So you might want to describe them in ways that are simplified for your character to understand, because these entities might represent alien concepts, or they might represent certain beings that cannot be gazed upon directly, lest your characters discover how insignificant and weak they are, and their heads begin to explode, for example. So why don't we start by thinking of that, thinking about color. So give me a color. What's a good color to have? Yeah, it definitely has some very interesting religious overtones as well. Like if you were to look at biblical depictions of angels, a lot of them are described as having multiple arms, multiple wings, multiple heads, lots of eyes everywhere, wheels within wheels spinning, circles of fire and stuff like that. These are abstract concepts, and great old ones are a good way of describing supernatural entities depicting abstract concepts. The joys of RGB means never having to pick a color. I don't know. Maybe you could give me a color code. What's a good color? What's a good color to use for this? Because we're gonna cyan. Okay, so cyan is gonna be one of the colors that we're gonna talk about. So cyan is gonna go into the title of this great old one, the name of this great old one. How about a let me think. An item. Non-Euclidean geometry? I don't know. I mean, lots of these great old ones and aberrations are very non-Euclidean, right? Sudden Shades of Aberrant. A puzzle cube, okay. So a puzzle cube is a great choice. So we have Cyan, we have puzzle cube. Let's give this entity a position in the hierarchy of a court. Say like whether they're a duke or they're an emperor or a king or or an earl or a lord or something. So how would you describe this entity's standing, or what would this entity's title in court be? The Empress Dowager. Okay, very good. Excellent. So now we have these three elements. Let's put this together, shall we? This is going to be fun. So we have the Cyan Empress Dowager of the puzzle cube, and that's the title of this great old one that our warlock is going to worship. King in Yellow's mama. Yeah, I suppose. And cyan is a very uncommon color to use to describe such supernatural entities. So we can start by looking at the correlations to the color cyan. So what does the cyan color kind of represent in terms of the magical emanations that come from this Empress Dowager or the puzzle cube? Or what kind of abilities would it cover? Clearly, the Powerpuff Girls count as horror to some. Yeah, Sugar and Spice, and what was that? Mysterious Chemical? Was it Mysterious Chemical X? I haven't watched Powerpuff Girls in centuries. Which kind of means I'm a great old one too, I guess. But yeah, so let's think about that. So we now have our Cyan Empress Dowager of the puzzle cube. Not so sure about the grade part. Well, I know one thing's great for sure. That's this Dendro slime hat that I'm wearing by Angelus Atelier. It's practically an aberration nesting on my head. Yeah. So Cyan Empress Dowager, the puzzle cube, patron of the warlocks, who worship her as a great old one. What does the Cyan Empress Dowager govern? What kind of magical emanations, or what's the significance of the color of the cyan color? Perhaps it correlates to the sky and winged things, while the puzzle cube could mean that she's about unlocking secrets and mysteries, because you have to solve the puzzle cube in order to unlock higher levels of knowledge. So perhaps this is an item that could be entrusted as an item of significance to a great old one warlock, right? So right now we have the Cyan Empress of the puzzle cube, and this is her magic, her arcane focus. So every great old one warlock or any practitioner of the arcane, blue is related to being intuitive and calm, that's for sure. That's entirely possible. In terms of color theory as well, it's a very calming color. So that kind of works. And most of the time, it's also quite a lively color as well. It's got kind of a bit of greenish cast to it as well, right? It's a bit of greenish blue. And it's about, I guess, maybe something that helps to keep your warlock grounded. So your warlock might be more skilled in deciphering arcane lore, perhaps. So that could be one of the inclinations of someone who has devoted themselves to the to this patron, the Cyan Empress Dowager of the puzzle cube. And you could definitely have that puzzle cube being a manifestation of their arcane magic. When they invoke their Eldritch Blast, perhaps they fire off squares of cyan color at people, or they unravel the puzzle cubes and they shoot out like, you know, individual cubes that scatter around and arc towards your enemies and hit them and explode. And that would be quite interesting. And not to mention the kind of magic that they have, right? So perhaps when they cast a whole person, cubes of cyan energy actually manifest and form around the target and lock them in place. So that could be quite interesting as well as in terms of the aesthetic and the design. The water, the concept imagery of water is great, yeah, and that could be quite aligned to that, to the waters, the skies. Perhaps this is a more benevolent Great Old One, as much as Great Old Ones are benevolent. And I guess it kind of fits as well because a lot of the magic of the Great Old Ones relates to the mind, and a lot of the spells are related to things like, you know, dealing with emotions, dealing with manipulating a creature's mindset, a creature's mentality, manipulating how the creature reacts and interacts. So that kind of works. So they sit in the corner playing a puzzle cube. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. You could put someone in a timeout zone and have them get stuck trying to solve a puzzle to get out. So that would be a great way to depict a maze spell as well. So if you were somehow capable of casting maze, perhaps with a with your Mystic Arcanum, you could create a maze out of puzzle cubes, and whoever is stuck in there is going to have to solve the puzzle cube by flipping the cube around, twisting it, manipulating its faces and all that. And until they solve it, they're not going to be able to come out. So that's an interesting way of depicting a maze spell as, you know, casted by a warlock of this Cyan Empress Dowager of the puzzle cube. So let's try something a little different. Let's pick another color and a few other elements. Maybe the puzzle cube's the only way to hook your followers. That's also true. It could be an actual way of. I mean, someone might find a puzzle cube in an ancient ruin or discover it in the top shelf of an old bookstore, or they might find it in the basement of their grand uncle's cellar or something. And that puzzle cube could be the way that they form their pact. The first time a character is introduced to the Empress Dowager puzzle cube. So it could entirely work. It's entirely possible. It's kind of like, what's the name of that movie, the Clive Barker movie, Hellraiser? Where there's this box where all these supernatural entities are sealed in as well. Imagine finding the puzzle cube as a free gift that comes with a meal, like a Happy Meal. Yeah, I suppose that's entirely possible. Who knows? It might have found its way into the hands of the warlock. Yeah, a puzzle cube that locks away a vault of knowledge is great, and that could be entirely how a warlock of the Empress Dowager of the puzzle cube learns new knowledge. As they level up, they undo more of the phases, and they discover that they get increasingly connected to the magic and the knowledge hidden within the puzzle cube. And it's all locked away because there might be some ancient secret of great significance. Something like a globe-spanning, a world-spanning secret, or a galaxy-spanning secret, right? That's hidden in this puzzle cube, and the Empress Dowager of the puzzle cube could be the guardian of the secret. But discovering the secrets could also mean the end of the world. Hey Trombe, good to have you with us. And good morning. Glad you're able to join us and listen in. A cube within a cube within a cube, because it's right only right for a higher order cube to be hidden inside. Yeah, definitely. I don't see anything wrong with that. In fact, each individual small cube that comprises the puzzle cube, it could be kind of like a Rubik's cube, right? And Rubik's cubes have multiple faces, and in each of those cubes there could be a secret hidden with it. So that's great. That's perfect. And by slowly unlocking each phase, you could learn more warlock spells, and that could represent your Mystic Arcanum. So from your 6th level Mystic Arcanum, 7th level, 8th level, 9th level, that could totally work. So yeah, so just by simply chatting, having a quick conversation, we've created a new Warlock Patron, the Cyan Empress Dowager of the Puzzle Cube. And I think that this is going to be kind of fun. And if any of you would like to use this as one of your Warlock patrons, go ahead. After all, we've created this together. It's kind of like a community effort kind of thing. We're just chatting, shooting the breeze. So come on, give us another color. Let's try building up another great old one patron, another Warlock patron. You definitely can. You don't have to. You don't have to limit yourself to any of the prescribed patrons in the books, as long as you follow the archetype. So Great Old One is an archetype, just like how the Fiend patron is an archetype, or the Hexblade patron is an archetype. But they could be very many different types of patrons within that archetype, within that umbrella. Like if you were a Hexblade Warlock, for example, you could also be perhaps drawing power from a supernatural entity, a cosmic entity from beyond the stars, except that you manifest their abilities through a weapon. So perhaps the Cyan Empress Dowager, the puzzle cube we just talked about, could also grant her powers in the form of a weapon. And perhaps this weapon is a sword composed of Lego bricks, or cubes stacked upon each other, or even a massive cube from which you could pull weapons. And that's entirely possible as well. So supernatural entities that you create, as long as you peg them to a specific subclass for your Warlock. So if you pick a relevant patron, you could just name them however you want. Okay, so yeah, definitely, as long as you have enough backstory and enough info, and if you are creative enough that you want to sit down and work with your DM, you want to work with your game master to create something unique to your character, by all means, go ahead. So like one of the most common examples I would say is you could be a Hexblade Warlock, but you don't have to follow the flavor set up in Xanathar's Guide. You don't have to say that, hey, you have made a pact with a weapon invested with the magic of the Raven Queen, or you made a pact with a specific representation of a magic sword. Because just because you're a Hexblade doesn't mean that you're limited to using a blade. And in most cases, the supernatural creatures that you entreat with, the supernatural creatures that you draw your powers with as a Warlock, you typically describe them with their titles. Okay, so let's see, Trombe, it's the only question you have time to ask, so I'm going to just try to answer that first. In a non-AL game, your character is an Eld Knight, flavored as your spellcasting being originated from a Warlock patron. Is that too off archetype for AL? No, of course not. By all means, go ahead. I think it's perfectly okay. In fact, though I don't think that this is an issue at all, because you do draw your magic from the source. And as long as you have a good indicator that, hey, I'm an Eldritch Knight, and I learned some spells from this particular patron, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, so you can definitely go ahead and you can definitely describe this as part of your backstory. Hey, Zixian, good to have you with us. And yeah, as long as it's reasonable, I think it's perfectly okay. I don't see that as an issue at all. In fact, if you wanted to, you could even say that you learned your magic from your warlock patron, um, and the warlock patron could even be someone like the Prince of Winter, which is obviously a fey, an archfey, right? The warlock, and they could have granted their powers to their fey knights as well, and their fey knights could be all eldritch knights, and that's perfectly okay. So it's really about how you tell your backstory, and as long as you're able to justify it and correlate that to the lore of the world that you're playing in, I think it's perfectly fine. Yeah, so that's great. Yep, there are canon warlocks who have stolen their powers from patrons. In fact, in some of the D&D novels, there are warlocks that have done that before, or some of them are born with some of the powers in their blood, or they have inherited the magic of their ancestors because their ancestors are the ones who've made the pact, and as the heirs of this ancient magic, they're capable of using the same spells as well. So that's perfectly possible. Entire body of the Great Old One patrons. You can practically create anything. So if you want to go in depth into that, you could even look at some of the aberrations that are in the monster manual. And imagine, what if you could dial up the power of one of these aberrations to 11? What if you could turn them into this great uh, super ancient ooze, perhaps? And perhaps this super ancient ooze becomes a patron. And that's entirely possible. Hmm. So yeah, so for Alex, if you want to talk about designing your own patron, you could totally build something that could fit into the story that you're playing in as well. So no problem. Talk to your DM and create something that's fun for yourself and the other players and the DM. You could all work through that together. And perhaps, especially if it's a home game, your DM could come up with interesting ways for your patron to interfere with your character's daily life. You don't play, you only imagine. That's such a pity. You should come play with us sometime. And give the game a try. Yeah. So yeah, so we talked about the Scion, the Empress Dowager of the Puzzle Cube. So this is actually quite, and I guess this is quite an interesting discussion that we have here in stream chat as well. So spellcasting for Eldritch Knights, yes, definitely is intelligence, and you could definitely be learning spell formula. You could be learning rune words that you're carving onto your sword before you unleash your magic. Um, for certain wizards, some wizards could also have drawn their powers from great old ones, perhaps not through forming a pact like warlocks, but through academic study. So if they are doing a bit more rigorous with that, like perhaps they picked up an ancient grimoire, an ancient magic book, in an abandoned ruin from a long forgotten civilization that was said to have come from beyond the stars. They might find incantations or spells in there that could, tap upon mental powers or supernatural powers related to their magical patrons. So that's entirely possible. Throne of Arcana is a it's pretty decent, and you can definitely see a lot of, yeah. It's by Cuttlefish Who Loves Diving as well, and there's a good healthy application of magic in there. I would say that Cuttlefish Who Loves Diving is probably a D&D player, and probably an old school D&D player at that, because you see a lot of references to D&D stuff in his content. So if you are a fan of Lord of the Mysteries already, you could also take a look at Throne of Arcana. And if you have not heard of Lord of the Mysteries or Throne of Arcana before, it's worth checking out. Shall we build another Warlock Patron since we're at it? I think that now that we've had a bit of a warm up, this is gonna come pretty quickly. It's gonna become pretty easily and naturally to everyone now. So pick a color, pick an object, and pick a title. Alex, why don't you give it a try this time? You want to pick a color for us? We could start with that, and we can since you said you enjoy imagining D&D stuff. No, I think, yeah, pick something, and we can start with that. Yep. So why don't you pick an object this time, and we'll work backwards. Juzu beads. That is an interesting choice. All right. Can someone else pick a color for us? So Juzu beads are prayer beads. So these are a little more, I guess, Asian in terms of concept. Yeah. So imagine Buddha is actually an eldritch horror. Well, if you know, the thing is, in a lot of supernatural stories and in a lot of web novels, there's often a correlation between established modern religion concepts as well as supernatural concepts. So it wouldn't be surprising to see some depictions of such creatures. Yellow. Oh, the King in Yellow is a good example of a supernatural entity who's also a great old one, right? And the yellow is used to denote other aspects. And when we talk about yellow as a manifestation of that would be quite interesting. Forceful Enlightenment is definitely a good concept. Yellow of accents of black. Now this is somewhat interesting. So we have got yellow of accents of black. We've got Juzu beads. What kind of title would you give this supernatural entity? What title would you give this great old one? So maybe Bodhisattva Bumblebee, Hive Queen. Yeah, Forceful Enlightenment sounds interesting, doesn't it? So since we're going Guardian. Hey Saitama-kun, good to have you with us. Guardian sounds interesting. Guardian sounds like a good idea. That we could use this for sure. So Guardian. So this is gonna be perhaps the Guardian of the black and yellow Juzu beads. Or the Juzu bead wielding Guardian in raiment of black and yellow. Which is quite a mouthful, right? So let's try to see how we can refine that. So we have Guardian, Juzu beads, black and yellow. Anybody want to venture a try? Perhaps you could do better than me. So far we've got yeah, prayer beads is probably better. So I think I think prayer beads will be an easier term to use, which will make it a little bit more universal as well. So let's go with prayer beads for that. So we're going to just change that around a little bit so that we get prayer beads instead of juzu beads. Guardian of the black and yellow prayer beads, perhaps. Or the black and yellow guardian of the prayer beads. What sounds more fanciful? I suppose Guardian of the black and yellow prayer beads is interesting, and we can go with that. Cat Eldritch Horror, Labyrinth Prince. Could be a Raksasha, perhaps. Who knows? That might be interesting to see as well. A Raksasha is a fairly powerful, fairly impressive looking creature in D&D. It's got a tiger head, and it has great command of magic. It's a shape-changing creature. It is practically immune to mortal magics. The Praying Guardian of the Tiger's Eye. Oh wow, Ting, that is a perfect title, and that is a great old one right there. I love it. There we go. The Praying Guardian of the Tiger's Eye. And this could be a great old one that perhaps has some more I guess Asian, if you're looking for a more Asian influence, Asian leanings in terms of the concept and the design, it could work really well. Or even if you're looking at a more I don't know, maybe a more Southeast Asian feel to it as well. That's entirely possible. Because it does kind of conjure images of those really ancient statues that you might see in temple ruins, like the temple guardians. And often many of these temple guardians, which have more bestial features, are seen as protectors of these areas, or perhaps they are the patron guardians of a tribe or an ancient sect of practitioners of the arcane arts. And perhaps all of them have taken this praying guardian of Tiger's Eye as their patron, and in return, they learn techniques that increase their cultivation or strengthen their cultivation, and in the end, ultimately, forceful enlightenment will come into play as well. Perhaps they are monks who have also pledged themselves to this guardian, and therefore they wield warlock powers. So imagine a monk that can use Eldritch Blast. Now that would be a much better monk than the Four Elements monk, by default, right? And it kind of fits the theme as well. So if this were a more monastic order, I guess this will work nicely, especially since you could hex someone and then punch them in the face with your flurry of misses. Flurry of blows. Sun Soul Monk, yeah, that could work. Definitely won't be saying don't pray. Good, well done. Yeah, so I think that we've pretty much gotten the hang of creating our warlock patrons, right? Great old one patrons. But this same concept, this same technique can be used for creating other patrons as well. You don't have to create great old one patrons by default. You could apply them to perhaps your Archfey patrons, because Archfey patrons often use titles as well rather than their names, because in a lot of myth and legends, names have power, and no supernatural entity is going to give you their true name, because giving you their true name is pretty much the same as putting the ability to control them in your hands. Fiendish patrons might do the same thing. So you can come up with some, yeah, that's entirely possible. 3-line titles. 3-line titles are a bit excessive, but I guess it could work. But most patrons will probably be known by their titles rather than by their actual names, because yeah, names have power. So it's always been the case. And in fact, one of the good examples of this is in the spell called Summon Greater Demon, or in spells that, or typically in the past, things like, when you're binding a creature to your will, or typically in mythology or in stories, you often discover that demons tend to hide their names, or supernatural creatures tend to hide their names because they don't want to be forcefully controlled by spellcasters to summon them. So that's one of the things about names and power, and therefore calling someone by their title is often the case for patrons or supernatural beings. But there's always this name that they were originally known by. So for example, if say a demon was born Bob, and Bob the demon, it's always a Bob, isn't it? So if you knew that Bob the demon's real name was Bob, but later on he changed his name to Beelzebub, and calling him by the name Beelzebub is probably something that he might want to be known by rather than his actual name. A bad example, I guess, because I could be really terrible with names sometimes. But it's certainly a lot better for them to safeguard their names if they could be called the Lord of Flies and the Lord of Flies, as opposed to by their actual name. And yet the idea of the true name, about the name that you're originally bestowed with, tends to be quite prevalent. It tends to be described as how this name has magical arcane significance. Like perhaps in terms of numerology, when you break down the name into numbers, it could correspond to some great magical secret. Or the name might have a certain number of syllables, and each of these syllables represents a fundamental part of the creation of this person. And that's typically the magical true names. So no self-respecting warlock patron might reveal their real name to someone. And that could be an entire story point as well. Like, what if a warlock has to go on a quest to discover the true name of their patron in order to break a pact? And yeah, that's also true. It could be practically impossible to describe a supernatural being who is from a higher realm of existence, or who is inscrutable to mortal imagining, by using the language that we know. So it might be difficult for us to put it into words. So the best way we could sum that up is to use a title to describe them as a concept. Because like Ting mentioned before, non-Euclidean creatures, right? So how can you describe a non-Euclidean creature or a concept that might be beyond mortal understanding with just a few simple words? And yeah, there we go. Lovecraftian horror. You're absolutely right. Mm-hmm. And that is absolutely true. In magical rituals, especially, and if you want to roleplay that out, and if you do a bit of research on how typical hermetic magic rituals are conducted, they often describe supernatural beings that they want to call upon using titles. So you could, for example, call upon the Lord of the East Wind, the Goddess of the West Wind, or whatever. Or you could pray to the Cosmic Thearch, for good luck, or an Earthbounder. Yeah, you don't call them by their actual names because it may not be respectful to use their actual names either. So there are often a lot of taboos related to that. Just like how in I guess in conventional religions as well, you're it's often mentioned that you should not take the name of the god in vain, right? So you do not actually use the name of the god. So that's one of the things that you can think about as well when you're describing how they might entreat their patrons or call upon their patrons for aid or cast their magic. So yeah, Warlock patrons, great old ones. We've chatted quite a bit about that. So in Forgotten Realms, there are different permutations of the gods as well. Yeah, like Lathander and Amalnator, different aspects that represent the sun, light, life giving. Some portfolios, I guess, or like the multiple gods of death. Yeah, I suppose to some extent they're all vying for influence and power, but gods are really, really significant and important in Forgotten Realms because they're worked so much into the story, into the lore. Just like how without Mistra, the weave is not sustainable, there will be no magic. So in older editions, for sure, that's in fact a one of their higher level powers and also described as one of the spells that divine characters can use. So they can make a physical manifestation of themselves, send it adventuring, whatever, invest a portion of the power into lesser beings, anoint champions of their own, stuff like that. Kinda, they can. I guess that's their way of leeching XP from lesser beings, I suppose, or sending their avatars adventuring so they can gather more XP, come back to them and help them. Hopefully, climb a divine rank, gain a few levels. But that's old edition D&D. And right now, I think that there's a little bit more abstraction where the gods are. In mythology, a good example would be Buddha reincarnating. Yeah, I guess so in that sense. Every life is gaining XP, right? But yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally. Some people just die without getting XP. Yeah, that happens as well. Or some people die, get transmigrated, and all sorts of weird stuff happens. And then they discover that they live in a world that's full of cosmic horror entities that are way beyond their understanding, like Klein Moretti. And there we go, back to Lord of the Mysteries. Please go read that if you haven't. Can't stress enough how great that book is. That web novel. So okay, I think we have chatted quite a bit about our Warlock patrons so far. And I think the next thing that we're gonna do is that we're gonna jump right into talking about some of my favorite aberrations. And from there, we're gonna work together to try to create bit of a I guess cosmic horror themed supernatural adventure. And if you want to work on that and develop that later on as an idea that you want to bring back to your home game or your homebrew tables, by all means, go ahead. So let's take a quick look at some of these creatures. That just pull that up. There we go. So we have some fun creatures here. So we have some really cool looking aberrations here on the screen right now. Everyone can see them. Um, and what we're going to do later is we're going to roll a d8. So I'm going to have one of you roll a d8 for me later on. And we're going to start with that creature as a premise for the story. So how many of these creatures can you recognize? What's number one? Does anybody recognize number one? Number one is a Gibbering Mouther. Yep, that's absolutely correct. That is the Mouther. Look at that. Look at that mass of gooey, oozy flash with the eyes and the mouths everywhere. It's one of the most awesome creatures who are aberrations. What is number two? Anybody recognize number two? Number two is also a pretty low-leveled monster. Kanye West. Oh, it's a choker. There you go. So Count Vanzarovich, you are absolutely correct. That is a choker. And that choker is also a common aberration that you might want to send after your lower tier parties. So the thing here is that all these creatures, all these aberrations here are all for suitable for lower tier adventures, because we're just going to talk about writing maybe a tier 1 adventure. Number 3, what's number 3? Number 3 is number 3. We have one number 3 on the shelf behind me as well. In fact, don't know if you can see it. I might be blocking it. That is a flump. Yes, absolutely correct. That is a flump. And of all the aberrations on this list, on this page here, the flump is the only good one, the only good creature here, the only good aberration. And look at that! It's so happy. It looks like it's just waving its tentacles about, cheering you on. It's super cute. Number 4. Anyone can tell me what number 4 is? It's like we're playing Identify the Aberration today. Sotong? No, so Nothic? Yep. And the Nothic is a rather unusual aberration. It's got a pretty cool story to that. Everything is Sotong? Yes, everything is totally Sotong. Number 5. It looks like a brain with tentacles and a beak. Brain with tentacles and a beak. Has anyone faced this creature before in D&D? Have you? It's a Grell. Chili Sotong, Sambal Sotong. Yeah, that's a Grell. And number 6 here is one of the creatures in the Beholder family. Some people sound hungry. Yeah, I mean, I'm not that big a fan of eating Sotong, but I sure love me some Sotong in my D&D games. It's not quite a gazer, it's an observer. So you're close. A spectator. A spectator is a not so high leveled beholder. But it has some of the beholder powers. As you can see, it has less less eye stalks than a beholder. What's number 7? Number 7 is a somewhat uncommon aberration. You don't see this very often. It's an Otyugh, yeah. And in the past, they used to be very stinky aberrations because they used to roll around in offal and carrion and all the disgusting, dirty stuff. And number 8, it's not a Sotong, it's not a squid. It looks like a lobster. And this one, I guess, this is also something that's not too common. I don't see a lot of people using this as well. It's a chul. Yeah, that's right. It's a chul. And these are our 8 aberrations that we're going to be working with as we work on developing the story together. So we're gonna tell a bit of a story here using these creatures. We're gonna pick one of them. So would anybody like to roll me a d8? Or what you can do is you can type !D8 in the chat, and it will roll a d8 for you, and we'll see where the dice take us. Okay, so Konvazarovich, well done. Got a 1. So we're gonna be, I guess 1 is gonna be the Gibbering Mouther, which is also one of my favorites. So that's great. It's a creature I know intimately well. Not quite unlucky, though it is very unlucky for people who face it. Gibbering Mouthers are great. So in all the adventures I've written with Oozes and Aberrations in them, Gibbering Mouthers feature quite prominently. In fact, in ooze-y, which is one of the first adventures I wrote for Adventures League, Gibbering Mouthers were, I guess, one of the things that players could potentially face. And that's a bit of a spoiler, but if you haven't checked out the module yet, you might want to go take a look at that. If you are a DM especially, it's probably one of the most helpful ways for you to get, learning about how you can use some of these aberrations and some of these oozes in your games as well. Now, we're going to start with the Gibbering Mouther. So the Gibbering Mouther is going to be the main stay of the story. So let's take a look at that. So here we go. We have the Gibbering Mouther. And that's going to be the main thing in the story. So I'm going to type it down. So Gibbering Mouther. So we're going to be working together now to tell the story. Yeah. So we're going to start with that. This is the big thing. So the Gibbering Mouther is the main monster in the story. How do we want the story to begin? This is about cosmic horror, right? So, like I said just now, we're talking about the insignificance of mortal beings. We're talking about how the participants in this adventure are going to be thrust into a situation where they feel that there is a great fear of the unknown. There's a sense of paranoia. There's a sense of mutual distrust. So how do we want to set this up? So what do we know about Gibbering Mouthers? For one, where we know that Gibbering Mouthers are amorphous creatures. Oh, you painted a mini the other day? Nice. That sounds cool. The Gibbering Mouther minis tend to be really, really complicated to paint because I recall that it's quite tough to get all the details. So I guess it takes a bit of skill to paint them and then make sure that all the details with the eyes and the mouths and all that come out. So I hope you had a great time painting that. So Gibbering Mouther is amorphous. It's a creature that is hard to pin down. And the Gibbering Mouther also has a very, very significant ability, which is that anyone killed by the Gibbering Mouther is absorbed into its body. And when this creature is absorbed into the body, it becomes a part of the Gibbering Mouther, and its mouth and its eyes probably appear somewhere on the Gibbering Mouther's body parts. So like on one of the appendages or one of the little bits of its rubbery form. So somewhere on the Gibbering Mouther's body, right? So how can we start this story? Perhaps we can start with a town. And people are disappearing in this town. Because that's often the case. And the adventurers, perhaps they are invited here by the local adventurers guild, or perhaps the town mayor, or they had a friend that used to live in this town but had mysteriously disappeared. So they've come to this town to visit. And that's probably one of the ways that you could pull them into the story to get them started on this hunt for this Gibbering Mouther. So let's put that in. So I'm going to start the call to action. I'm just going to mark it blue. So this is call to action. And people are disappearing. So this is the main thrust of the story. So this is what happens in the story. How about a bit of background? Let's try to figure out how the Gibbering Mouther came to be in this place. Shall we give the town a name? Does anybody want to suggest a name for this town? It's going to be probably a backwater town, I guess, in maybe the Moonsea region. Not a popular place, to say the least. Not as big as one of the communes in, Malvont or Malmaster or whatever. So could be a tiny town. Just give it a name. I guess we could name it after the area that it's in. Perhaps it's on the cliff. So shall we call the town Cliffside? Stardew Valley? Oh wow, Stardew Valley. Okay. So people are disappearing in Stardew. Okay, so Stardew is the town. And since people are disappearing in Stardew, your characters have headed to Stardew because they're there for a visit, or they're there to look for a friend. But how did this Gibbering Mouther come to be? So we know now that there's a Gibbering Mouther eating people, absorbing them into its mass, growing bigger by the day. And this town is called Stardew, and people are disappearing. So how did the Gibbering Mouther appear here to begin with? Perhaps if there was an ancient aberration buried in the mines in Stardew. Perhaps some of the people who lived in Stardew decided to excavate the mines, and one of them excavated a vein that led to the Gibbering Mouther and released it. And that was the first victim. That could be entirely possible. So let's put that in. Who was the one who married Krobus? I don't know. Maybe that's the one who was also responsible for releasing the Gibbering Mouther. So let's put that down as well, so we know that this is the background. So background. GM was released from a vein in the mine. So yeah, so there we go. So that fits, right? That kind of fits. So now the characters are here. They're looking for their friend who has gone missing. What next? What then? The town was built around the site of a falling star. The star was the Mouther and took decades to gestate. Perfect. That is an excellent way of adding to the background, and yeah, well, that's great. That's perfect. It's absolutely fitting for this. Why was the town built around the star? That's a nice question as well. So something we can think about. Maybe the town was built around the star because it was an omen. It was a sign. Maybe the people who were the founding fathers and the founding citizens of the town were following the movement of the stars. They saw a portent in the heavens, and they were drawn to the call of this falling star. Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? They're all superstitious folk. They live in a fantasy world. Maybe they thought, hey, falling star, meteor metal, star metal is powerful. Lots of adamantine to mine. Free money. Or there could be some arcane or religious significance to the falling star, and they followed it, and they came to build Stardew. And then, not realizing that there was going to be bad stuff, they built this large community around it, this village that eventually grew into a town. that's fairly prosperous because of the metal veins, because they were excavating parts of the Gibbering Mounter from the fallen star. Yeah, that could work. If it did that, then they could definitely be very, very helpful to creating, more value for the town as well, to getting and that would make sense for why people will come congregate at the town. So now we kind of know that there's this giant falling space rock. So let me note that down. Falling star was the was the Mouther, was the dormant GM. So now we know this. We know this as well, and we're gonna just put this down here. So this is quite valuable information. I think adding in the aquifer is also very good. By default here. Arcane portents and strange signs in the heavens. So now we have all these things added here. So this gives a good, healthy amount of backstory. So perhaps the founding fathers and the founding people in this town, they realized that they could build a new life here in this place. Perhaps they were refugees. Maybe their original kingdom was destroyed, and in order to build a new life, they came to this place and they followed the star streaking through the skies because they were a bit superstitious. They thought that it was a good sign, a positive sign. So they followed the falling star. They came to this place. They discovered it had cracked open the ground. There was an underground spring, and they discovered that the star had fallen into an area where there were rich mineral lodes as well. Everything was looking good for these people who were refugees from a ruined kingdom. So they came here to build a new place. They founded Stardew, and the players may know someone here. So the players are here now because they were looking for their friend. And having come to this town, they discovered that their friend had disappeared. And their friend had disappeared ominously without any information, without any knowledge being shared with them. What had happened? No one knows how that had transpired. Characters have friends. I sure hope so. I mean, I hope that the player characters would have managed to make some connections to NPCs. But if they didn't, perhaps someone might have called upon them. Someone might have said, hey, there's people disappearing in this town. It's really odd. Maybe you as reasonably seasoned adventurers, or you as adventurers who are trying to make a name for yourselves, you could head over to Stardew, find out what's going on. There's some coin in it for you from the Adventurers Guild, and perhaps you could get to the bottom of the mystery. So that's going to be the call to action. They're going to arrive in the town. They're going to discover that people have been disappearing. There's going to be an atmosphere that's a little tense in these parts, right? Because what self-respecting NPC, what self-respecting citizen is going to be happy and joyful and continuing and carrying on with their lives when their neighbors are disappearing? It doesn't make sense. So people are going to come here, or rather the adventurers are going to come here. They're going to discover that things are a little tense in this town. The atmosphere's not so comfortable. They're going to find out the locals are looking a little bit paranoid because their friends, their neighbors, have just disappeared without a trace. Out of nowhere, vanished into thin air. and nothing is found of them. Not even their remains. It's as if they had just disappeared from this town without trace, without any indication the day before. There's nothing to set them off to tell them that, to tell their neighbors that, hey, something's wrong, something's weird, something's mysterious. But there might be some telltale signs. And since we're talking about Gibbering Mouthers, since we're using Gibbering Mouthers as our villain, as the main monster that the adventurers are going to face, there are going to be some signs. There might be some things amiss. So there might be gibbering and strange whispers, because Gibbering Mouthers do that. So there might be some people who might have heard these gibbering and strange whispers shortly prior to their neighbors being abducted or their neighbors disappearing. Yep, your neighbors Uno and Dos have disappeared. What about Tres? Are you Quattro? So yeah, so what happened to Tres? So you suddenly discover, hey, Tres is gone as well, or Tres disappears under the watch of the adventurers. Now that will be interesting to see. What other telltale hints might there be? Ah, I see what you did there. Well done. They disappeared without a trace. Good job. This is where Jazzian might come around and hit someone with a D20. So another thing to think about is how Gibbering Mouthers affect the areas around them. They might create strange marks and indentations in the ground because of the way that the mouths on their appendages grabs and dig at the ground, and because of the aberrant earth ability. So these might give some telltale signs that something's not quite right. And the initial part of this adventure, I imagine, would be for the characters to go around town exploring, questioning people, making observations, because this is going to be investigative, right? So this is going to be them moving around town, talking to townsfolk, trying to figure out what's going on. So that's going to be the next part of this adventure. Investigate the town. And while they're investigating the town, what happens? I guess while they're investigating the town, they meet with different NPCs. Yeah, so that's it. That's exactly it, which is why sometimes the townsfolk may hear strange things when the aberrations are close, when the Mouthers are close by, like when they pass under their windows at night. They may start being affected by the Mouthers and they may be confused. Yeah, exactly. Like Lovecraft's Rats in the Walls. That makes sense. So that's one of the telltale signs for sure that the Mouthers are afoot, right? Like if they pass under the window, or some people who might be sleeping near the window's open. And if the Mouther doesn't just sneak in and grab them, the Mouther might affect them with the whispering, with the gibbering. And because these are commoners, these are townsfolk, they might be easily affected by these whisperings, and they might have strange dreams. They might have weird visions. They might feel that things are not quite right, but they can't place it. And because this affects their sleep, it gets increasingly difficult for them to be well rested. They wake up exhausted. They wake up feeling very uncomfortable and not quite at all like themselves. And when that happens, people in the town start getting increasingly paranoid as well. So they know that something's wrong, but they can't quite place a finger on it. And this is the kind of sense of paranoia and fear and the atmosphere that you can create for a cosmic horror story, because this is exactly what the characters feel. Sounds like you when you get up in the morning, but I guess that's what happens because you're a space cow, right? You're a dire cow from outer space. So you're a great old one. Waking up uncomfortable, hot and sweaty. Yeah, that totally makes sense. And perhaps some of them may wake up in the middle of the night and they may see shapes moving about in the darkness. But because they're of the sounds that they hear, because of the weird squelching and the weird squelching noises, the weird the really odd chewing noises from the mouths, the weird gibbering, people are afraid. They're not going to dare to go outside and find out what's going on. And perhaps those who follow the noises, those who went outside to investigate, they're never seen again. So perhaps during the day, when the adventurers arrive, mm-hmm, yep, that is absolutely correct. And that can be pretty dangerous as well because they get confused. And that feeds onto the sense of paranoia. They may feel compelled to become violent. They might start attacking their friends or their families. That's absolutely possible. And you can mark that off as, I don't know, you can chalk it off as people getting more, I suppose, grouchy and grumpy during the day because they're not getting enough rest. And we all know that if you don't get enough rest, if you stack enough levels of exhaustion, you actually start failing those saving throws because you're going to make those with disadvantage. So that's a mechanical justification for this. But you don't have to be so fully mechanical as a DM. You can just work it into the story. And yeah, so people are becoming violent. People are getting angry at each other for no apparent reason. People are claiming to hear strange whispers and gibbering in the night. And as the characters begin to investigate, as the characters move around the town, you start to realize that hey, there is something really, really wrong here, something really odd about this place. And perhaps the first meeting with this Mouther, or the first indication that this Mouther is up to no good, is when the characters are woken up in the middle of the night when they're staying at the local inn. So that's going to be the next part that we can work into the story. All right, so let me just put this down here. So maybe they discover the Mouther coming for someone in the room nearby, in an adjacent room. Perhaps they're the ones who hear the whispering and the gibbering at night, and they wake up hot and sweaty and uncomfortable, only to see the Mouther writhing about in the darkness outside, a distance away. But it's going to be tough for them to follow because the Mouther might blind them with a flash of light, because the Mouther can use blinding spittle as an ability. Or the Mouther might have created, a mass in the ground, and they're restrained in that mass, making it difficult for them to to chase after the Mouther, or for the victims to run away if the Mouther decides to attack them. So they might witness an attack during this particular portion of their investigation when they're when they're resting, when they arrive in the town on the first day. So late at night on the first day, after investigating, after asking around about the strangeness, about people being bad-tempered, grouchy, violent to each other, and then they get attacked, or they witness an attack. What next? What happens then? Perhaps the characters are compelled to follow the Mouther before anything else happens, before more lives are lost. They may confront the Mouther in the street. They may start a fight. People start coughing. I don't know, but yeah, they might start. They might start chasing after the Mouther, and they might confront the Mouther. They might beat down one of the Mouters, and this is just one of many Gibbering Mouthers that are out and about at the time. And having discovered the source, having discovered this one Gibbering Mouther, they might say, there you have it. We're done with the adventure. We have discovered the cause of the disappearances. We have uncovered the mystery. Let's call it a day. Let's call it a wrap. They might decide that it's time for them to leave the town. And that's all well and good. That's a good way for you to pause the adventure on that note. Maybe if you are playing a home game, go to a different adventure before coming back because actions have consequences. Maybe the next time they stop by Stardew again, they discover everyone's gone. Everyone's disappeared and gone missing. But if they choose to continue investigating the town, they'll soon discover that this is not the only Mouther that's out and about. Because the following day, they might be very happy with themselves, wake up in the morning, bright and early, all cheerful, ready to pack up and go. And then they discover, and they might go report to the local mayor, hey, we've killed the Mouther, we're done. That's the end of the danger here, we're all set. Only to discover more people have gone missing despite their efforts. And that's a hint that there are more Mouthers about. And then, that is where things take a decidedly different twist. What would happen next? So, this is probably the call to action in the first scene. So we're going to just jump to the next part. We're going to talk about the next scene of the story. So, following day, people still disappearing. So this obviously shows that that they are not done with the quest. And if they thought that they were done and they had left, well, good luck to them. But I guess they'll have to bear the consequences of what they choose in future. If they stay and they discover that people are still disappearing despite their best efforts after going to inform the mayor or inform the people who are the authorities in this area that they have done their job, they discover their job is not quite finished. They're going to need to continue investigating. And eventually, they're going to have to go down into the area of the mines where the meteor once fell. So that's the next part of the story, right? They're going to head over there. So they're going to head to the crater where the meteor once fell to discover what had exactly happened. And that is where they will discover that there's a whole colony of Gibbering Mouthers out and about. So when does someone get corrupted and broadcast gibbering over the radio? Now that's exactly the thing. Because if this were in Forgotten Realms, they might get ascending, I suppose, or some sort of magical message. Maybe the local mayor had kept a scroll of some sort, or a magical token of some sort for emergencies, and they might send out a call for help. Or the adventurers might head off somewhere far away and come back at some point in time to discover that the entire colony of Gibbering Mouthers had taken over the town. Bad stuff had happened, and it's up to them to make things right when they receive such a message. So that's entirely possible. Colony of Gibbering Mouthers all out and about. If they brought the Mounter with them, that would be an interesting choice. I know some players who have adopted monsters as pets, but I don't know how a Gibbering Mouther would fit well with an adventuring party. Stowaway, yeah, that could work. That could be really hilarious. Like a tiny tendril that like snuck into one of their pockets and just sticking out and wiggling about and waiting to eat them. That's entirely possible. Or they might have taken a sample because they wanted to bring it to the next town where there's an arcane tower or a wizard's guild or something. Would someone that speaks completely random nonsense be out of place in the party? Yeah, you're right. I guess not. I mean, knowing adventurers, they might fit right in. So yeah, let's see. Meteor Crater. So this is gonna be the part where we're gonna be working in some extra content here, right? So what's dangerous at the Meteor Crater? What do you envision happening at a Meteor Crater? For me, I would say, other than the colony of Gibbering Mouters that the characters are gonna have to face, there's probably some safety hazards as well. There's probably gonna be some environmental hazards. Hey there. We do have quite a few people joining us today, and that's great. So thanks for coming on and hanging out with us. And we are talking about creating a cosmic horror-ish adventure today. We picked the Gibbering Mouther as the monster of choice. This aberration here I'm wearing is a slime. It's a dendro slime hat from Genshin Impact. It is quite an aberration, so it is quite fitting for today's discussion, I suppose. Good to have all of you with us. I think that for the Meteor Crater, on the way there, they're probably going to have to go through the mine. We might want to put in some other creatures that might be thematically appropriate for this. So perhaps there are some villagers who have been affected by the gibbering and they've been left helpless in the mines. And the characters may have to rescue them. So they have not been devoured by the Gibbering Mouters just yet, but they may be in danger and the characters may need to go assist them, rescue them in some way or the other, and that could be an added complication. So this is something that we could add in as an optional encounter or a side quest. So let's call it a side quest for now, and it's like rescue some townsfolk. So this is one of the things that we could think about. Alternatively, there could also be some added complications. There might be some weakened infrastructure, weakened supports inside the mines that the adventurers need to navigate. So these are environmental hazards that we can work in as well. So environmental hazards. So let me write that down. Collapsing mine shafts. So this is something that we can consider. We can put this in as an added complication to the story. Pull it lower so we can see it in its full glory and go mad. Here you go. Can you see that? And just bounce around a little bit like a dendro slime and wiggle. All right. What else can we have in the lead up to the colony and Gibbering Mountains? Because let's face it, it's going to be pretty challenging, I would say, for a group of maybe 3 to 4 low-level adventurers to face a whole bunch of Gibbering Mounter. So perhaps they could also find ways where they need to rally the townsfolk. So maybe they need to get more help. They may need to get the townsfolk to work with them. So rally the townsfolk. Or maybe, you know, get help from nearby settlements. So maybe there's no local militia, but the nearby towns might have one. So they might need to send some people out to get some help. And these are additional complications that you can use to add to your story. So this will make the story more interesting. And ultimately, when they get to the colony, when they come to face the Gibbering Mouthers in the meteor crater, and they discover that these Gibbering Mouthers are fragments of a much larger Gibbering Mounter that have been sent out to devour the townsfolk to bring back sustenance. What happens? So there's gonna be that big, I suppose it's gonna be like a big boss fight. So this is gonna be facing a larger, more dangerous Gibbering Mounter, and to simulate this larger Gibbering Mounter, which is a lot more dangerous, I think rather than using the Gibbering Mounter stat block, we could use something a little more, a little more interesting. And my gut feel for this, as a adventure designer, is to use a black pudding as the representation of a more powerful, larger Gibbering Mouther that is capable of you know, creating offshoots of itself. So we could also use, I don't know. I mean, looking at my Van Richtens, I think that that's one of the things that we could explore, but it's a little too powerful. I think it's a little bit on the strong side for you know, a tier 1 adventure for lower level characters, like for level 1 to 4. So it's a bit too powerful. So it would not be a good representation. It would not be ideal. So I would say that using a black pudding is probably okay, which is why I was looking at the black pudding. And I think that the black pudding is probably a good idea for that. I mean, from a storytelling perspective, I would say that that super big Starspawn emissary is really great, but you want a challenge that the players can overcome at their level, right? So Starspawn emissary is probably a bit too much. So yeah, I would definitely use a black pudding to represent the big Gibbering Mouther, and we'll still have some smaller, regular-sized Gibbering Mouthers in the works as well. So let me think about that. Perhaps for the encounter design for this, we would have this as black pudding reskinned as big Mouther, plus 2 or 3 regular Gibbering Mouther. I think this is about right. Let me just make this a little bigger so we can see. So I think this is a pretty fair encounter for a low-level party, maybe 5 adventurers of average level 3 or thereabouts. It's certainly not the worst. And because they move so slowly, and if the players are smart and capable of using the terrain around them, perhaps this meteor crater has, you know, bits of stone jutting out, stone pillars, bits of rock that have fallen down. It could be a big cavern with enough places for the characters to anchor themselves to, or enough places for the characters to just jump around. Kind of kind of like a jumping platform puzzler kind of thing, maybe, then they could have an easier time blasting the Gibbering Mounter and its companions with magic or with ranged attacks. And if they could rally the townsfolk to help them, maybe the townsfolk could come with barrels of burning oil and stuff like that, and they could all tear down parts of the cavern using their pickaxes. They could build a barricade. So there are a lot of ways that the characters can be creative here in this fight with the Gibbering Mounter at the very end. So this is in a very quick and dirty way of just building the encounters, building the adventure together. And I think that we have kind of put together something that sort of will work as a framework for an adventure, for something that's a little bit more cosmic horror-ish. But what do we do if we want to add an extra layer of complication to this? How about we add a little bit more to the mix? So can I get another one of our viewers to roll me a d8 using the !d8 command? And we are going to pull another one of these creatures on the first page. One of these 8 aberrations into the story. And we're going to refine the story with this extra aberration in the mix. Can someone roll me a d8 if you please? !d8 in our stream chat. Come on, !d8. Oh no, it's another Mouther. We're gonna... Oh, you have used 4 of these aberrations in your current campaign. Well done, Talmaru. That's great. Which ones? Alright, so can we get a reroll on that? Can we get a reroll on the one? Because we don't want double the number of aberrations here. We don't want twice as many Gibbering Mouthers. Got an 8 there, so there's a Chul. So, oh nice. Flump, Growl, Spectator, and Otiug. Very nice. So all the floaty, tentacly stuff. And the Otiug is obviously a super fun, super brutish, if a bit stinky monster. So that can be kind of cool too. And I'd definitely love to hear more about your campaign. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that in stream chat as well? Otiug had a drift globe? Wow. So was the drift globe like tied to one of his tentacles or something? Oh, kind of like an anglerfish. That is super nice. And the players actually bought it. Drift globes float on command, and yeah, because that is really quite an interesting way of pulling the characters in. I'm guessing it took place in an area that was absolutely dark, and the drift globe was the only thing that the characters could see. Yeah, that is super cool. I haven't seen a lot of DMs use Otiugs myself, so hats off to you. All right, so we have the Chul. We have the Chul here as the other aberration that we're going to use to enhance this story. So where do you think we could stick the Chul in for this story? Do we want to see a kaiju battle at the very end? The Chul coming out of the ground to battle with the giant Gibbering Mounter? Because that would be kind of fun. That would be kind of exciting and cool to see with the kaiju battle style, kind of like Godzilla Wizard School. I suppose if they went off to look for help, they could probably get a Chul to join them. Talaria Academy, Homerids. Man, I hated those Homerids so much. Alright, so let's just put down the tool first as an added complication. So what I'm just gonna put this here. So this is a tool, and we're gonna place this tool somewhere in the story. So I'm really leaning to the tool helping the players. Like maybe this tool is another sentient aberration, another creature from beyond the stars. So it might have come to deal with the Gibbering Mouters. I think we're limiting ourselves to the creatures that we have here on the first page of our Jamboard. But that's definitely something you can explore for your own stories. If you want to use this framework that we've created, that we've discussed so far, to tell your own stories, you could definitely work things in to build up on that. Chul sensed something in the creator and approached it out of instinct. Possible. Or perhaps this Chul is a... Perhaps this Chul was the original local aberration. Who knows? Or this Chul is a creature that the players discovered along the way. Well, maybe when they're doing one of the side quests. Or maybe down another one of the collapsing tunnels. But whatever it is, I'm leaning towards a Chul coming in to help them against the Gibbering Mounter boss, as well as the regular Gibbering Mouthers. And this Chul could make the difference between them having an easier time or having a harder time. Because we definitely want the players to have a fighting chance, and if we are using a reskinned Black Pudding, as well as several other regular Gibbering Mouters, if the players are somewhat unlucky, and if they're caught in melee range, and they are affected by the Blinding Spittle, which makes it very hard for them to attack or see, or the Gibbering, which makes them attack their allies possibly or do nothing, it could lead to a very unfun encounter for them. So having the Chul come in as an added complication that actually helps them might give them a better fighting chance, right? So that might be useful for them as well. And I think that that's quite critical to making it more exciting for the players. Or perhaps the Chul has a control module that's attached to the Chul. Like maybe the meteor wasn't just a meteor that was a complete Gibbering Mouther, but a crashed spaceship from beyond the stars. And both the Chul and the Gibbering Mouther were creatures that were stored in stasis inside the spaceship. So now we go into sci-fi territory, which departs a little bit from our cosmic horror angle, but it isn't unexpected for arcane experiments to take place, or some gestation of these alien creatures to take place in this meteor. So maybe the Gibbering Mouther and the Chul were both locked in the meteor, not just the one, but both of them. And there's some sort of arcane sigil, like an arcane collar, or some sort of arcane incantation or device that could be used to control the Chul. And you could give that to the players. Like, one of the things I would really love to do is to write an adventure where the players get their hands on a PlayStation controller, and they can use the PlayStation controller to manipulate a monster and have the monster fight on their behalf. Because that is really cool, right? That's like playing a fighting game. And maybe they could find something they could use to control the Chul, and use the Chul, pilot the Chul to fight against the Gibbering Mouters. Yeah, Illithid Spelljammer, yeah, that could totally work. That's very, very likely. Especially since, Spelljammers and Illithids and other planar traveling beings, who are incidentally aberrations, are fairly commonplace. In fact, lots of aberrations are planar travelers as well, like the Aberlath as well, and beholders and stuff like that. So I don't see why not. Yeah, give it a magic snack. Yeah, it could be like giving it a doggy treat but magical, and maybe the Chul will be as docile as a puppy and come after Gibbering Mouters with you, and you can control that, and that could be fun. That could work as well. That could totally happen. I can totally see that happen. Alien versus Predator. Yeah, totally. So yeah, let's toss the Chul in as a complication, as an ally. So let me just put a bracket here. So the Chul is an ally of the party, and we have discussed a little bit about how we can use the Chul. Hey John, good to have you with us. Yep, you totally made it in time, and we were just talking about how to add more complications to our story. All right. So since you're here, John, why don't you give us a D8? Exclamation mark D8 in stream chat, because we're going to add a third layer of complication to this adventure. We've just talked about how a group of Gibbering Mouters have been devouring the people of this town called Stardew, where a meteor once crashed. It seems that the meteor held the Gibbering Mouther, which was gestating in there, and it took many years. And all of a sudden, the Gibbering Mouther broke loose and attacked and has started to devour the people of the town quietly, surreptitiously, adding them into this mass. And there's a Chul, which was also inside the meteor, who turns out that it's going to be an ally of the party. It can be controlled. So we haven't decided what yet. Ting suggested giving it a magic snack. I was thinking about using a PS4, PS5 style controller to manipulate the Chul, like fighting game. But, we can decide how to do that later on. That's not a big deal. And the D8 that you rolled, we got a 6 out of it. We got a 6 out of that, and the 6 corresponds to the spectator. Yeah, so it corresponds to the spectator here on this chart of aberrations that we have. And where are we going to put in the spectator? The spectator seems like it's going to be a great fit in this story as well. So we're going to slot the spectator in somewhere here. So I'm just going to come back to the second page of the Jamboard for a little bit so that we can do a quick recap. So we know that people are disappearing in Stardew. We know that this is caused by the Gibbering Mouters who came with a meteorite. People have been hearing strange whispers and gibbering at night. People have been getting angry. People have been getting unfriendly with each other. Things have been quite unpleasant. The town is feeling really paranoid. The players come in at this point because one of their friends, if adventurers had friends who were NPCs, is missing. And they started to investigate, and at night they discover that there's a Gibbering Mouther trying to eat one of their roommates at the inn. And that has prompted them to head to the meteor crater. So they had to come to the meteor crater to deal with the colony of Gibbering Mouters. So we know we have the boss fight. We have things set up. Spectator as spaceship AI. Yeah, I guess that could totally work. It would be kind of fun as well. Maybe it's the ghost of a spectator. Since if we want to do that, we might as well go all the way. So that's more of the sci-fi vibe there. So we can put in a spectator here. So let's put that down, spectator. So it's kind of like the Spelljammer AI. So it's kind of like the spaceship. So, or perhaps it has some sort, or maybe it can provide some backstory of what happened. So it could be like a like plot exposition. This is for tier 1 adventure. So this is for lower leveled adventurers for sure, because we don't want to use the super high leveled aberrations just yet. We might do that in future. So that's something that we could explore in the weeks to come, I guess. Or the spectator could be, I suppose, part of a failsafe in the meteor that the players can also call upon or seek the assistance of. Or it could be that the spectator had gone rogue and the spectator was the one that had unleashed the Gibbering Mouters to begin with. And it was all a plot that the spectator was somehow involved in. So that's one other way we could look at it. Yeah, beware the spectator, yes, very much so. Especially if the spectator is also the one that's providing the exposition and making sure the narrative presses on. Oh, for sure. For sure, aberrations have lots of powerful abilities that could curb some of the, I guess, the more common strategies that players have. But I suppose we want them to feel that they still have a fighting chance, which is why, we're writing this as a tier 1 adventure. So the players have a good opportunity to succeed, win the day, avenge their friend that was devoured by the Gibbering Mouther, and move on to play another adventure and further their tale, right? We don't want them to all become victims of aberrations and be devoured and end up with a bad end, because that would not be so good. That would not be cool at all. And how do we end the story? Now that we have got a pretty good idea that we have an ally, we have some more plot exposition here, how do we end this story? So we're going to come to the conclusion for this tale. How do we end the story? Do they defeat the Gibbering Mouther and the Gibbering Mouther colony and burn everything, set everything on fire, kill it with fire, and call it a day? Did they discover that this is a prelude to a bigger invasion by creatures from beyond the stars, which will lead to part 2, another adventure that we could continue writing and designing? Do they discover that things have moved beyond their control? Whether the creatures are twisting the world or twisting the PC's minds, yes, that is true. Some of the otherworldliness, yeah, definitely something to think about. And hence the use of Gibbering Mouters is great, because the characters are definitely going to be affected by the Gibbering if they're not lucky, and that's where you play that up. Encourage them to roleplay, especially when they're attacking their friends. Destroying all organic matter nearby. I suppose that could work. They could blow up the meteor, pretty much. And while blowing up the meteor, they blow up the town as well. So it's entirely possible for them to do that. Digging up otherworldly elements, bring the attention of some otherworldly cult. Yeah, I think that could work. So some cult could get involved later on. Or perhaps some cultists have already taken root in the town. After all, if we're talking about cosmic horror and the influence of these supernatural entities. Yeah, I don't play Halo, so that's a good explanation for my benefit and for the benefit of everyone here who does not play Halo or has not played Halo before. So it's very likely that if cultists were involved, there could be a bigger story to this. Perhaps one of them smuggles away a part of the Gibbering Mounter before the players blow up the meteorite and sets everything on fire. So especially if they had gone to rally the townsfolk. So if they have actually gotten the townsfolk involved, some of them may be allies of the Gibbering Mouters already. They may have pledged themselves and they had become maybe warlocks, drawing power from the Gibbering Mounter Prime or from the cosmic entities or the great old ones that are related to Gibbering Mouters and this meteor that has fallen here. So that would be one of the possibilities. And those townsfolk who are not so aligned with what the players want to do would be very much involved in trying to find ways to sabotage their efforts, or maybe to keep the Gibbering Mounter, or at least one of the Mouters alive. So that could definitely be part of the story. It could lead to part 2. So we could talk about cultists. I think that adding the cultists in is great. That's a great way of adding another layer of complication to the story. So let's put this in. And another way that we could look at it, another thing that you could think about is how the cultists might be connected to the player characters as well. Imagine if their friend that they thought had disappeared was the chief of the cultists. That would be another point of interest in the story. That could be a dramatic element as well. That might be a great reveal. Mm-hmm. So that could totally work. All the NPCs that they meet were previous adventurers that succumbed to the cult. Yeah, that's entirely possible and became cultists. They could have been manipulated. And it's also possible that if you wanted to add another dimension to this, if you wanted to add a third layer to this to make it even more, I guess, more disturbing as a story. Yeah, you could definitely have all these creatures, all these people who lived in the town be those who were enslaved before, to some extent. And you could also consider that the people who have disappeared and were devoured were all travelers who had lodged here, or people who had moved here and settled here because they heard about how prosperous the town was. So the original group of people that followed the meteor, the original group of people who founded the town, and their descendants are all part of this cult. They're all already involved. They were all already aware. The first time they came in contact with the meteor, when they came to the crater to set up their town, they had already had their minds affected by the super Gibbering Mouther, and they were all put under its thrall already. So that's very, very much a possibility as well. So that will make a great discovery as part of the story. And that would make things a whole lot more complicated and add a third layer to the story. Probably starting the blacksmith who got corrupted from breaking open geodes. Yeah, I think the blacksmith would make sense. Especially since it's typically the skilled craftsmen when they're building a town and they're looking for and they're picking through the ores. It would be the miners, the blacksmith, maybe the local mayor as well. So it starts from there. And then it starts to spread. And then as more people came to the town because the town started growing bigger, becoming more prosperous, or even the pieces of ore that were mined from the meteor and sent out into the rest of the kingdom. So if you think about it, if the pieces of ore that were sent out into the kingdom brought to other towns nearby because of trade, because of passing adventurers, because of because of people who travel through and to and from this town, those those little bits of metal, for all you know, could be Gibbering Mouters waiting to hatch as well. The harvest price are probably Mouters. I guess that would totally make sense. So imagine that. Imagine that while they were mining from the meteor all this entire time, they were just spreading the influence of Big Mouther to the rest of the world. What if the town was actually empty and all the townsfolk are some kind of doppelganger type aberration pretending to be people? Yeah, Elder Oblats could make that work. Totally. Also, read Lord of the Mysteries. Not gonna spoil too much for you, but read Lord of the Mysteries. That's gonna be fun. But yeah, Elder Oblats is a good choice if you want to do something like that, because the Elder Oblats can create simulacra of people, especially those whose memories it has devoured. So the Elder Oblats is a great monster to use at higher levels. And I have used the Elder Oblats in one of my tier 3 adventures that I wrote for Adventures League before, Fenarius Gambit. And you can check that out as well if you're interested in reading more about the story or drawing inspiration from the module. It's available on DM's Guild. But yeah, so now we kind of have a more complete picture of the story so far. So now we know that there's another layer here that we added at the very end that kind of builds up the story and creates additional content that you as a writer can develop. Yeah, if you... Yeah, that's definitely true. If you want the players to not feel unsatisfied because they may not actually have solved the mystery, give them a chance to discover the true story behind the town and give them a chance to fight back. Or maybe this could be the start. This could be the first adventure in a long-term campaign where they have to slowly disassemble the influence of this cult of the Gibbering Mouther. And perhaps discover that its tentacles have wormed their way into society on a far grander scale, setting the stage for a supernatural takeover or an invasion from the great beyond. So that's going to be the world-spanning plot. So maybe this is just a start, because if this town is known for its exports of adamantine, and you realize that adamantine mined from the meteor crater is actually just, Gibbering Mouther that's gestating, waiting to pop out and cause problems all around the realm. It could make for a major story point, and it would be a great end to the campaign if you discover that this is just a precursor to a cosmic invasion, and the players have to stand up and face this world-spanning threat from beyond the stars. And then they can deal with the CR 19 to 21 star spawn that we talked about a while ago, the one from Van Richten's. Because by then, at the end of the whole campaign, they will probably be in a good position to fight that one. Not right now when they're just, fresh-faced farm boys of destiny coming out of their backwoods, going to find a friend in the nearby town. Yeah. Or something else might happen, like perhaps they'll all get abducted and taken into outer space and they start an adventure in Gibbering Mouther Kingdom. Who knows? Right? Because that could be fun. That could be interesting. It's just kind of like the really offbeat, weird endings in Silent Hill. Like the alien abduction ending. Because that could totally work. So yeah, there we have it. I think we have more or less covered today's little writing exercise. And I think we got quite a bit done with today's writing exercise. Wow, I can't believe we did. Look at that. So we now have a good story here waiting to be written. So if anyone wants to take a look at this, I will be making this Jamboard available for later as well. I'll just post a link to this Jamboard when we upload the VODs. So if anyone wants to just take a quick look at this, you can. And feel free to use some of the ideas that we've discussed for your home games. If you'd like to do something for your home games, based on what we just talked about in the stream today, you can do that. So by all means, go ahead. We definitely did have quite a bit of content here put together for this mini adventure that we wrote together on stream. And I think that this is something that you can definitely explore and develop into a concrete story. So that is our Oozy and Aberrant adventures for you. And on Wednesday, I think I'll be doing a little bit more reading of Lord of the Mysteries. I think we left off at chapter 9 the other day. And I'm probably going to get a couple more chapters in on Wednesday. So if you want to come hang out on Wednesday, it's our NTP casual media stream. That's happening on Wednesday, same time, 8 o'clock at, Singapore time, GMT +8. So more Lord of the Mysteries, casual reading, dramatic live read of that. And on Saturday coming up, there's going to be another painting stream with Jazian. So Jazian's going to have more painting content there on Saturday for you. And you can definitely just come hang out for that as well. If you love to paint your own miniatures as well, be sure to drop by and chat with her about painting techniques or just share with us whatever you're painting, right? So that's going to be on Saturday. And next Monday, we're going to pick up on more DM tips and DM inspiration. So if there is any particular creature or any particular monster that you think would work in a story and you want us to develop a little bit of content around that, maybe talk a bit about how I might use the monster, or some of my tactics and ways I could use the monster in my stories. Or if you'd like to do a few more creative exercises, just like this one tonight, and you have something in mind that you want to chat with us about, by all means, let us know. Check us out on our socials below. Drop us a note on Facebook or Twitter, so that we can work something out just for you as well. So we still haven't quite decided on the monster that we're going to feature next week, or the kind of genre of story that we want to talk about next week. So we are definitely open to suggestions. If you have something you think you want to see now, let us know in stream chat as well. Just type it out. We'll put it up into our board of ideas, and we might pick that up for next week. Who knows, right? So that's that for our stream today. I hope you had a good opportunity to work on this exercise with us, and I hope that you had a good time with that, because I know that I enjoy writing adventure content on stream, and I love talking about these ideas and developing them with you. So let me just do this for the stream just a little bit. There we go. Yeah, so if you liked what you see today, then definitely come hang out with us again. Every Monday is our D&D stream. Every Wednesday is our casual media stream, and Saturday has Jazian doing her painting hangout. So if you love minis, drop by then. And yeah, so tonight, Aberrations, Oozes, Eldritch Horrors, some story development there, some talk about developing your own Warlock patrons. Remember, the formula is pick a color, pick an object, and pick a title, string them all together into an idea, and there you have it. That's the name of your Warlock patron. So I hope that that was a useful tip for everyone, and I hope you had a great time here with me. And we've come to more or less the end of today's stream. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for spending the past 2.5 hours with me. This is Crimson, signing off.